a little bit of. So thanks for being here. I've even prepared a PowerPoint to help you look at things in the meantime while I'm talking. So let me share that. I'm not going to use any co-moderator or so on. So if you have questions, no problem, put them into the chat window. I'm going to try to keep an eye on that. So if I see something popping out, I feel like it's really worthwhile, and I'll probably go for it. I might also just get lost in my story and then just only look at your questions afterwards. I think you can unmute yourself. It's a manageable group size, let's say. So if you really think, oh, I need to get this off my chest or ask a question, then try to politely or gently interrupt me. That would be totally fine. Yeah. Okay, cool. Let me see if I can look up my shared thing. So when I was doing sort of the master of things, I discovered that this is actually Scrum Caretakers Meetup number 16. Um, I felt like that's not really a lot because I started this thing back in 2016. So over all those years, only 16. I'll try to do more and be a little bit more consistent in organizing them. So, but anyhow, thanks for being here. We're going to talk about Scrum. We typically call it Scrum a pocket guide. Now, again, that shows a pocket guide. It sometimes people think that I've made it up as a sort of reference to the Scrum guide as well. That is totally not the case. A pocket guide, it was just a series of the publisher. So they have a number of pocket guides around several topics. So it just became Scrum a pocket guide. I also gave it the subtitle a smart travel companion. Still like that a lot. So I don't know if you're interested in a little bit of history of this thing, because as I told you, I started creating it in 2013, was published in November 2013, and that is amazing, 11 years ago. And that a subtitle of a smart travel companion is certainly reflected in the very first cover of that book, where it has sort of hikers on the cover of it. Now, the year after, when they reprinted my book, the publisher decided to give it a new look and feel. It was the same content but a different cover in 2014, and then I only updated it back in 2019.
Uh, Gunther, you've gone on mute for a second there.
Yeah, you muted yourself.
Yeah, I'm not even sure he realized. He
No.
probably he probably doesn't hear us either, so
Yeah, I'm worried his audio's gone, if you know what
Oh
I mean.
no.
No, it's not. I muted myself. Oh yeah, okay. No, no, sorry for that.
And that was,
Okay.
I think, a minute ago. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. So I don't know. Let's go back. So first version 2013, and the cover really represented this subtitle. I gave it a smart travel companion because I wanted to help people to focus on the fact that it's all about the journey and much more than just about the destination. So the first cover in 2013 had hikers on it to reflect this idea of being on the road together as a group, as a team, or teams as an organization. Now, in 2014, when the book was reprinted, um, the publisher had decided over a new look and feel for their pocket guides, and so that was changed. I updated the book for the first time, and that was so I called it an accidental creation. So by accident, I created the book, and I call it then a deliberate update or a deliberate evolution back in 2019. Having done classes in the meantime, workshops, worked with people, worked with organizations, and finding different words and better expressions to share how I feel about Scrum. So, and then in 2021, the third edition, um, aligning also with some sort of terminology changes in the Scrum guide by then, and the same idea, improving my wordings and my phrases and so on. And now finally, 2024, the fourth edition. I've been thinking that for three editions in a row. This is the final edition. I will never rework this again. I will never go through that pain again. But I thought that with the previous editions too. So you never know. What happened more in the meantime, in 2016, I translated my book into Dutch, which is my mother tongue, which is my home language, let's say. One of the most difficult things I've ever done, writing a book in English, and I felt like, yeah, translating into my own language should be easy. Well, it wasn't. It was very, very difficult. Uh, the third edition, I also translated or updated the translation of my Dutch version. There's some people that speak Dutch. So in Dutch, we call it Scrum Wegwijzer. And with the subtitle on Compass for the bewuste reiziger. Again, journey, compass, that sort of thing. You might also see that on the cover of the first edition. This guy, again, hiking on a journey, looking at his compass to see where he would be going. And then more things happened. It was translated into German, not by myself, because my German is far from good enough to do that, by two German friends, Peter Götz and Uwe Schirmer, translated into German, called it Scrum Taschenbuch, with the, for me, very difficult subtitle of Ein Wegweiser für den bewussten Entdecker. Which is cool. It wasn't updated at some point of time anymore. In 2019, the second edition was also translated by volunteers again in Italian and into Portuguese. Which is wonderful, except not one, except but only the publisher wasn't really interested in those languages. But I know it's part of dealing with publishers. They had obviously all the publication rights to every possible language. So it was funny. I had to buy the language to the rights to those languages for myself, from my own publisher, which I did. I bought them also for three other languages. People that said, "Oh, we want to translate your book into other languages." Never happened. So I just lost some money over there. We published them in Italian, Portuguese. Portuguese was mainly sort of aiming at the Brazilian market. I think never really sold a lot of things. Spent a lot of time on it, also designing, working with the graphic designer for the covers and so on, getting them published in both Kindle and a hard copy version via Amazon and so on. Never did a lot of things. There was a second edition of the Portuguese book, and I think in Portuguese it's called Scrum Guia de Bolso. I think that's sort of what the idea is. Companheiro de viagem inteligente. Something like that. I hope I'm not insulting any Portuguese-speaking people. So the second edition, the third edition, 2021, was used for an update of the Portuguese version. And then finally, a Chinese version was published, and a version specific for the Indian subcontinent was released via a local, it's called Computer Bookshop, I believe. And then there was a Chinese version created by some friends in Taiwan. Those books were officially published by my Dutch publisher. Never sold a lot of things. It seems that people want to go for that original English version anyhow. 2 years ago, some guys translated also in French, and in French it's called Scrum and Guide de Poche, un compagnon de voyage intelligent. So really, really beautiful. Now, overall, sales figures are for those translations not too great. My ambition is under the pressure of my publisher, because they're a Dutch publisher, to update the Dutch version. And by now, I know how much work goes into that, and that is my biggest thing blocking me from. I know how much work goes into that, but I'm going to do that anyhow. I've decided not to spend any time anymore on the other translations, despite volunteers who are wanting to update the translation, because in the words of my publisher, I don't have a business case for that. Spending so much time on it and sales really not catching up. If you're interested, I'm probably way too open about all those things. These are sort of the sales figures of the various editions. I meticulously keep track of those things. So give me figures, give me reports, and I'll enter it into some sort of spreadsheet and then get graphic and whatever out there. So as you can see, it sort of most sales was in 2019. It's gradually been going down again. So that's probably an indication that I should be thinking about writing a new book. Although I already know upfront, it will never be as successful again as this book. So it's some sort of crazy things. But what I wanted to talk about is obviously the changes in the book, what some people would like to know about. And what's funny was recently in Madison, in Wisconsin, in the US, and Jamie Kriegel told me, Gunther, this new edition, this almost feels like a new book. So the previous updates, great, but you thought it was like minor updates, let's say. This really feels like a new book. And I don't know why. I do know that what I wanted to change, I couldn't just keep it to that. I'll come back on that. So I started reading my book front to back, and I've been changing so much. So I just here want to highlight the big changes. Again, I'm this big fan of change tracking in the Word. Again, my update is full of red. It's full of changes, all little tiny whatever things. One of the things I've changed, I don't know if you remember in my book, so in the first three editions, I had this idea of defining, not really defining agile, but sort of defining agile by highlighting what I called sort of three key characteristics. So, and in the meantime, if you're okay, I'll just read that. So, in my book, it says, first of all, when I talk about the origins of agile, the word, I close that little section by saying, when using the manifesto, as you know, the Agile Manifesto for Software Development, as a source to gain a deeper understanding of agile and the ideas underpinning it, I strongly advise, and I still stand by that advice, I strongly advise looking at the 12 principles behind the four value statements. I think that is really important. But then in the chapter of definition of agile, I have to start by saying there's not really a really great concise definition of agile available and also not possible. So what I say in my book and what I've been saying all those editions, in the absence of a concise, specific definition, I prefer describing agile in terms of three characteristics. And I say that these are the traits that are common to the portfolio of agile methods and are typical of an agile way of working, regardless of the domain or industry. And what I used to say is that any system claiming to be agile, and go back to the Agile Manifesto, should be people driven, should have this idea of iterative incremental progress. So not the waterfall, whatever I think, but iterative incremental development and iterative incremental progress. And the success factor should be in value, not in volume, not in industrial types of things, manufacturing and so on. And then when I was updating my book and preparing for that fourth edition, I had to think back of a long time ago, 2014 already. So after that first edition of my little book was published, and by then I had written a blog note that said Scrum is a stance tool, between brackets. So Scrum can be called lots of things, but it can also be called a stance. And not really by accident. It's about people again. It's about empiricism, and also the focus or the success should be value. So there's sort of who involved, how we work, and why we do what we do. And what I call the Scrum stance is people employ empiricism to optimize the value of their work. And again, that's sort of regardless of things. Now, in the years after, I've been at some point of time, I had the question of my publisher to write a new book and write an agile pocket guide. So I had Scrum, a pocket guide, and publisher wanted to know whether I was willing and able to write a book called Agile, a pocket guide. And I started with that. I created some sense of manuscript and so on. I took various directions and so on, but it never really worked out for me. It didn't have that sort of body and whatever that I wanted it to have. But in those days, I did travel the world. And at events, I talked about agile and what I called agility, at least. Agility, I sort of oppose that with what I've been calling perplexity, being perplexed by things, being frozen, paralyzed by things, sort of the antithesis of agility. Um, and I started with that same idea of three key characteristics of agile, and I call them the prime agile tenets. Takes me a long time to come up with those phrases and words and so on, and browsing through dictionaries and so on, not being a native English speaker. And I talked not just about people, but I felt like I was thinking about, I tried to create a sort of a word of my own, and I call it collaborative, meaning not just collaborative, but collaborative, meaning continuously, actively involved in collaboration. So more than just people, I call it collaborative people. And I also had the ambition by then to say, it's not just about an iterative incremental way of working. An iterative incremental way of working helps us respond to change, deal with change, potentially manage change. That's all great. But you know what? In highly complex, uncertain environments, dealing with change, responding to change is not enough. You have to be able to almost let go of things and thrive on what I've called deliberate emergence. Because responding to change is being able to deal with things that emerge. And it should go one level up at least, meaning provoking things to happen, making things happen, although you will not know what will happen, how it will happen, and so on, and then build on that and deal with that. Sort of deliberate emergence, being provoking change, and then using that to cause change and not just answer to change. And value for a purpose was still the idea. And when I was updating my book, I felt like, okay, I'm going to keep it to what I call iterative incremental progress. But I'm going to change this idea of just people, and I'm finally, after like 7 years, we've moved on 7 years. I'm going to build on that word. By then, I use it collaborative people. It resonated with people, and I felt like let's really build that into the book. So that is a change in what I call the prime agile tenets. So the three characteristics of any system of agile, meaning people in a continuous state of collaboration, open for collaboration, seeking collaboration, looking for collaboration. That's sort of the idea. That's why I like the active. It's not just waiting for collaboration, waiting to be asked for questions, or sitting right. No, continuously seeking collaboration. So that was one of the changes in my definition of agile. Another thing I realized as I was updating my book is that I probably need to be a little bit more humble about the future. And I don't know, in my book, I've got this chapter. It's called "Is That a Gorilla I See Over There?" I like to have like sort of tempting and lovely, funny titles in it, whatever. But it goes back to the idea that in my book, I've used the technology adoption life cycle. It's by Jeffrey Moore. It's with the chasm and so on. It's also called TALC, TALC, so the technology adoption life cycle of Jeffrey Moore. I use that to sort of get an idea over the maturity, the level of adoption of Agile. And I don't know if you know, but the technology adoption life cycle is a specific instance implementation of a general product adoption life cycle. And what had Jeffrey Moore found out about the adoption of technology, highly innovative things happening certainly in the technology market, technology products. He had noticed that after the first phase of adoption, which he calls the early market, within the early market, first products, new things, innovative ideas get adopted by technology enthusiasts and visionaries in the first place. And often then products, technology products, innovative, disruptive products and services seem to disappear, seem to sort of go under the radar again in some sort of black hole types of things that more called the chasm. Some products disappear, go away forever, not to be seen again. Other products come out of the chasm and then go into the next phase of adoption. And that chasm, that was something that Jeffrey Moore identified as unique and typical and is specific for technology and innovative disruptive products. So that is not happening in classical traditional products. Now, after the chasm, if a product or service comes out of the chasm, it gets adopted by what Moore calls pragmatists, or what he calls the early majority of people. And what are pragmatists and early majority are typically people that are not into a product or a service because of the innovative level or whatever, but are facing problems with current solutions and are looking for a new solution that might help them. So they're looking for benefits, advantages, business advantages, and so on. Where technology enthusiasts and visionaries, it's just about the novelty. End of discussion. They don't care about what it brings or the benefits or economic market business, whatever benefits. They just want to be the first ones to get to know what is new on the market. Pragmatists are what it says pragmatic about it. So they want to have a solution to a problem where the current solutions are not working anymore. Within pragmatists, there's this phase called the bowling alley, and then followed by tornado. And the result of the bowling alley phase is a gorilla. So it means a market leader, where a gorilla is very difficult to overthrow the sort of chief boss, whatever gorilla, sort of the market leader. That's the whole idea. There are different leadership models like kings and so on. Can be overthrown, there can be a revolution and so on. That is not as easy with gorillas. Yeah. So I've been using that. Now the rest of that model, so I've been applying that then to Agile. I say, Agile came into the world in 2001. All the things that happened before then was sort of pre-Agile. So I used the technology adoption lifecycle because Agile is used, a way of working, a way of developing products. So it's used on products that will probably go through this cycle. But Agile in itself is also a very different, innovative, and highly disruptive way of working on the technology market. That's why I wanted to use that model. And then I saw, you know what? I think everybody agrees around 2006 and more like 2007, a little bit 2008, Agile came out of the chasm. So Agile survived the chasm and as a disruptive way of working, in that sense, a disruptive product, it came out of the chasm. That's also highlighted by, you can read it in my book, by companies by then starting to report out on them. I think a very famous example is Yahoo, which is also a good example that Agile or Scrum in itself will not help you thrive or prosper in the long term, because who talks about Yahoo these days? But around those days, they were like really, really early adopters and part of that early majority. Now, the rest of the cycle after the conservatives as an audience, after the pragmatists, you've got the conservatives as an audience, late majority. It's then called, the adoption phase is called like Main Street. And you see the curve going down. So after that is this last phase of assimilation, where only new people adopting the new paradigm or service are called laggards. That's not really a gentle way to describe them, but people that are really going to adopt a new way of working, a new service, a new product, once sort of only once the rest of the world has already done it. Now, I've been thinking about that in my book, and in the previous edition of my book, I maintained that viewpoint, and I said, you know what, I don't know where we are. I don't know, are we in bowling alley? Are we in a tornado? It's not black and white, it's not clearly delineated, and so on. So it's sort of fuzzy for me. So I call it a whirlwind. I said, I think we're somewhere, we're certainly across the chasm, and we're still in some sort of whirlwind. And in that whirlwind, um, I see a couple of potential phases. I've called them waves. I've called them the Scrum waves, waves of Scrum. And I said, you know what? As Agile came out of the chasm, a lot of companies went for Scrum, but from a very much IT perspective. Scrum as a new IT process to deliver work and things, often within the organization, to be quicker to deliver things from IT, often to the business departments or the business part of the organization. So very, very IT-ish helped us go for cross-functional, multidisciplinary teams, but all very IT focused. And when I look back at things, I felt like from around 2011, 2012, we went into a new wave of Scrum. And it felt like for me, the two topics in that wave were like divergence, in that sense, new movements popping up, giving them all different names. I think we all know at some point of time, Spotify things happening. Certainly, DevOps became sort of important. And when I talked and worked with organizations, it felt like they were doing Scrum, they were trying to do Scrum, but they didn't want to call it Scrum. They gave it different names and so on. So they had all these sort of different movements, often just because people wanted not call it Scrum. And at the same time, there was also this idea of scale, which by then I also categorized, let's say, under that divergence umbrella. And then as from 2017, so this was an update 2019. I wrote it in 2018. My belief was looking into the future, I hoped that at least the third Scrum race that was about to take over, that was already taking off, would be just about Scrum again. People discovering that, big scaling frameworks not working out, agile transformations failing all over the place. That was sort of my belief. And I know, you know what, people will discover Scrum again, the simplicity of Scrum, and do Scrum sort of right this time. And that was a sort of humbleness. Sometimes I like to put that into quotes. And this one is based, by the way, on reading about quantum mechanics or quantum physics, by the way, uh, saying that we can remember the past, but we cannot remember the future. We cannot know what will happen. But I've added to that, we can, however, try to shape the future. And that's what we should do. So I've updated this sort of idea of the Scrum waves in my pocket guide because of two reasons. One, who am I to think to know what will happen with Scrum? Because by then started this update last year, even this year, 2024. It was very clear that my assumption around the Scrum wave was totally off. It was totally wrong. Some sort of humility in that sense. And I felt like, okay, let me just describe what I think were key elements of those different waves of Scrum. And I still think that first wave of Scrum, as from 2007, was still around IT, looking back. The second wave of Scrum was still around divergence, new movements, but also scale. So I've put scale more like up front, let's say, or almost like front and center in this as important in that second wave of Scrum. And I realized around that time, 2023, 2024, that third wave of Scrum was in a way, in the end, was all about doing Scrum as part of some sort of transformation. Call it an agile transformation. I wrote about it at some point of time. I've called it the illusion of agility. And most agile transformations deliver nothing but an illusion of agility. And I've learned to be humble about what is going to happen next. I can't say, and I'm not going to try anymore. I'm not some sort of wizard, and I shouldn't be claiming to be some. So I have no idea what is going to happen in the fourth Scrum wave. What I am really convinced of that in terms of the technology option life cycle, that we are moving from the bowling alley into the tornado phase. So I truly believe that the fourth Scrum wave is coinciding with that tornado phase. And what is important in that tornado phase, and let me read that from my book first, because I have not added the quote here. But what is typical to the tornado phase? So let me just read it from my little book. When I explained the technology option lifecycle model, I had to add an explanation about the tornado phase. And I'm saying during the tornado phase, and this is general technology option lifecycle, not typical Scrum waves or anything else, just the overall model. During the tornado phase, the adoption and dominance of the now must-have product keeps increasing. So the Gorilla product is now the must-have product, and people keep adopting it. So the adoption keeps increasing, and thereby also the dominance of that product. But the tornado phase is only a highly creative phase that ignites even more innovation for those willing to head the herd, for those that allow the new must-have product to drive forward the emergence of fundamentally new infrastructure businesses and organizations. So this is the model in general, potentially causing even complete swap outs of them. So that means the technology option lifecycle says that in the tornado phase, the companies, the organizations that will stick out are the ones that are not just adopting the new product, but using the product to drive forward really innovative things happening at the organizational level and the enterprise level and the structures of organizations. And this is how I've added it in my book. So I said, you know what? I believe that entering the fourth Scrum wave coincides with transitioning into the tornado phase, um, which means that Scrum will be used most effectively by organizations that in a way have the vision, the courage, the determination to take that next step. And not just use Scrum as the new process, but use Scrum as a way to rethink how they are organized, how they do stuff, silos, departments, and so on. And you know what? Even potentially set up, use Scrum as the engine to rethink the complete organization. And I've added to that. So rather than trying to think that I can predict the future, which is a silly thing if I think about it anyhow, I said, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that helping organizations get even more out of Scrum is going to require really pioneers again, a new generation of visionaries and pioneers. And I think it might be up to the level of the guy that got us out of the waterfall trap a long time ago. So we're still on the technology option life cycle, but the next wave of Scrum will be more beneficial to those rare types of people or rarely available types of people or whatever weird people that are willing to take it to the next step. And I use that also as an excuse for myself to know I'm not attracting people to my classes, and you know what, it might be not because this is transcending this sort of mass production, mass adoption of Scrum. This is again focused on people that have the willingness and the courage to go beyond that. I've tried to capture that in another statement I'm going to use as a quote, although it's been many years already that I've been saying these types of things. Scrum is only used effectively if organizations rethink the structures around it. I think I started saying this as I left Scrum the Talk in 2016, started working with organizations, saw what's happening with agile transformations and so on. More agile teams, and agile is only for the teams, and Scrum teams need to be set up, and they're set up within silos and departments and so on. And then all those organizations not showing the courage to think about processes and governance and procedures, HR types of things, even how they deal with people and so on. So by then I started saying this, and I think the time has come that this is really going to happen. Now, I don't know if you know my Scrum game board, but this is actually the only change I wanted to make in my book. In the previous edition, I had this game board in place. My initial idea back in 2013 already with my game board was not just to highlight the mandatory elements of Scrum. We all know that five events, three artifacts, and three roles, which are now called accountabilities, but also add some stuff to that, and mainly some important principles that I say are underlying Scrum. And in the previous edition, had next to my Scrum game board, I had still the Scrum values. And I felt like, oh, it's not good enough. I want to have all elements of Scrum on one game board. And that means, what have I done in the new version? And that was, I anticipated this to be the only change in my book. I totally failed at that in that regards. So I've changed progress trends into general things, visual management. So at the heart of this is producing value via the increment of product. Product being the vehicle of value. And product backlog, sprint backlog, plans, increment, outcome. And I wanted to focus on progress trends, important, but probably not the only idea or the only way to manage work. So I've made that a little bit less specific and called it visual management. So working with people, certainly collaborative people, is going to require a lot of visual management. And in terms of the principles of Scrum, so I've moved the idea of having a workplace that you can organize for yourself as a team. I've moved that into the chapter of self-organization. You cannot truly self-organize if you don't have your own room that you can organize, that you can decorate, that you can change, and so on. So having in the previous version that shared visual workspace that I called. So on the bottom thing, I've changed that into I've moved that into self-organization, and I've added the Scrum values to this. So to highlight my idea that Scrum is not just a framework of roles and specific instructions, the mandatory elements, but also a framework of values and principles. So the two main principles, it's what I've been called that Scrum's DNA for a long time, self-organization and empiricism, and now I've added the Scrum values. So the game board, I think, now holds all of the elements I want to be recognized as part of Scrum. The only little confusion that people might still have is in that events types of things. So on the right-hand side, I've called it sprint planning, but planning with non-capitalized. That means I talk about the activity of planning. I don't even mean the literal sprint planning event. By the end of the sprint, we have reflections of the sprint. You have two types of reflections in Scrum officially, the sprint review, the sprint retrospective. I just wanted to capture the general idea of Scrum. Planning for a sprint, then using the daily Scrum to manage your sprint, and by the end of the sprint, make sure that we have some reflections in place. And as they rename development team into developers, I still like to sneak in the fact that it's still a team. It's still about the team of developers, the people out there on the field playing the game. So this is a change to my Scrum game board. So I think all of the essential and mandatory elements of Scrum are now on that one game board. I think. You never know what might happen in the future. I've also added a little bit things about complexity and simplicity. A quote that I've been using for a long time, complexity is our world, simplicity is our path. And I felt like 2024 still, I needed to emphasize something about complexity and simplicity. In that sense, and that's in this quote, I'll also read it. I often see the misconception, I believe is a misconception, that people think that by using Scrum, the problem will become simple. And I don't think that is true. Our problems will always be complex, meaning full of uncertainties, full of unforeseeable events, things that will happen. So otherwise, if Scrum would make problems simple, we wouldn't need a daily Scrum. because the daily Scrum helps us adjust, adopt, adapt, incorporate changes and new sites even within a sprint. So the idea of simplicity was never to say that Scrum will make your problems simple. The idea of Scrum is to use a simple approach to a complex problem based on what I've called Scrum's DNA, meaning self-organizing people working in short cycles that we call sprints so that you've got adaptability. And that's something I added in this quote saying, you know what, the simplicity of Scrum is crucial to address complexity. But when we say that Scrum is simple, we mean to say that Scrum has a simple set of rules. Yeah? When we add that Scrum is not easy, because you all know that Scrum simple, not easy, a phrase that we use a lot. That was a long time ago invented or created by Ken. So we say Scrum is simple but not easy. So when we add that Scrum is not easy, we mean to say that it is not easy to stick to Scrum's simplicity. And that is certainly not for organizations with their roots in the industrial paradigm, meaning also organizations that do not have that willingness that I just addressed to update their structures around Scrum and just keep Scrum to the team level. Yeah? So the idea of Scrum is not to pretend that the problem itself becomes simple by using Scrum and would thus not be complex anymore. And it is a little bit of a word game for a non-English native speaker, but still, that would be simplistic. So it is simplistic to think that Scrum will make a problem simple. The problem will always be complex, always uncertain, always unpredictable. So, and that's something I wanted to highlight in my book to help people. And then I've added two new things to my book. So not just changes to existing things. One thing I've added is a little picture to hopefully uplift or remove some sort of confusion, at least of how I look at Scrum. So what the Scrum Guide describes are the rules of the game. It's literally called like that. In my book, I talk about the rules of the game in a chapter, and then in the next chapter, I talk about tactics for a purpose. So Scrum has mandatory rules, meaning again, three roles, accountabilities, the events and the artifacts. Those are the mandatory rules of Scrum. On top of that, or within that, you can employ or use different types of tactics. Example, Scrum only says to have an ordered product backlog in place. What you use to describe product backlog items, we don't have a rule for that. You could use user stories, you could use lots of things, epics, whatever, different types of things. That is a tactic, that is a choice. So we've got mandatory rules, and they have tactics to implement. We need tactics to implement those rules. That all works on top of what I've just called the principles of Scrum and the values, meaning self-organization, empiricism, and the combination with the Scrum values. Those things at the heart of this picture are the things that are sort of hidden underneath those the description of those rules. And the purpose of Scrum is value. This is what I call, this is again trying to create some sort of complete picture of what Scrum is about. Way too many people are focused on the rules only, not minding the underlying principles and forgetting and not understanding that tactics are about choices, optional things. Scrum has no instructions on tactics. Scrum only defines the rules. So that's a new picture I wanted to add to my book to give people a view of that sort of cohesion of Scrum as a whole, which is more than just debating over the rules of Scrum. And then as I was writing the book, and I was in that chapter called Tactics for a Purpose, so first describing the rules of the game, and then highlighting what we mean with tactics by giving some examples. And some examples in the book is about user stories. It's about the three questions of the daily Scrum, even about scaling up your Scrum. It's about how to manage progress via burnout charts or something else. Those are all tactical choices. And as I was writing that, I felt like something is missing. Something that I felt is really, that I've experienced that's really important, meaning great development agreements or an agreement over how to do the work. As I said, Scrum has no instructions on tactics, but it is important to have an agreement of tactics in place. So, although Scrum has no rules over what those tactics should be, you cannot do Scrum properly without having tactics in place. And a long time ago, back in 2003, that's, by the way, the subject of the next online Scrum Caretakers meetup. I've had great experience with extreme programming, and I still believe in the power and the potential of those things. So I wanted to highlight that. I wanted to add that. So I've added a new chapter to the chapter of tactics for a purpose, and it's called extreme development. And let me read out the chapters to you guys first, if you're okay with that. Now I'm going to stop sharing this because I don't have it here. So let me just from my book read out that chapter. I've got a good experience, I don't know if anybody's involved in the Corona crisis. I did some reading of my books. So in a number of sessions, each week it was one of the, I think the third edition, and did read it out, and people seemed to appreciate that. So let me try to do that again with the new chapter. So it's called Extreme Development. And it starts by saying that the rules of Scrum don't include specific development practices, meaning no exact instructions on how to perform the work. But as part of transparency and the emphasis on teamwork, Scrum does, however, absolutely require that development standards are established, agreed and adhered to. Scrum cannot be employed to its full extent if they are lacking. And with this thing, I want to address this problem that we've had in Scrum for a long time, that people think that by now organizing stuff in sprints and going through the meetings and the events, whatever the ceremonies, whatever you want to call them, will sort of magically solve everything else. And it's not going to happen. So, and I continue by saying, while the definition of done is particularly important in assuring that all have a shared understanding of the qualities and state of the work, development practices are needed to collectively and incrementally create done output, meaning that the output complies with the definition of done and generates valuable outcomes. So highlighting that you need output that needs to be done, and in order to achieve that, you need a clear agreement on how are we going to do that? How are we going to create done output so that we can generate valuable outcomes? And I continue by saying agile development entails closing feedback loops regularly and repeatedly within the sprint, preferably even at a higher frequency than that of the daily Scrum. It helps in assuring alignment and consistency, as well as in catching problems and errors early. Consider the propagation of errors that, if not detected early, potentially endanger proper closure of the sprint. What I mean with that is we all know Scrum has a big feedback loop called a sprint, a little feedback loop on top of that daily Scrum. What I'm saying is you need even more feedback loops than just the daily Scrum. Even on top of that, I've picture for myself small feedback loops that come from your development practices, so that within a 24-hour cycle of the daily Scrum, you've got more feedback loop implemented within the team. With specific practices like pair programming, test-driven development, continuous integration, refactoring, and collective code ownership, extreme programming, and here I quote a book by Ken Beck, the original book of Extreme Programming Explained, where Ken Beck said that extreme programming nominates coding as the key activity. And I think that is so important. Without coding and great coding standards and development standards, no done output and no valuable outcomes. And I say, although the practices from extreme programming are good, but non-mandatory practices from a Scrum perspective, Software development teams should seriously consider adopting them and turning them into a daily habit. Because a long time ago I wrote a blog notes about pair programming should be a daily practice or a daily habit. The combination of Scrum and extreme programming is one of those rare mixes of methods where the unique flavors are not lost, but mutually augment each other. I would go as far as to say that Scrum and extreme programming were born for each other. And it makes me think back of a long time ago. I know we started, so the next online meeting will be called My Life of Scrum started with extreme programming, which was a really good thing. So later on, we wrapped our extreme programming practices in Scrum. So for several years, I kept combining Scrum and XP. But I remember in May 2004, I went to my CSM class with Ken Schwaber here in Belgium, in Brussels. Um, Afterwards, it looked like it was the first CSM class in the Benelux. But again, I didn't plan for that. I didn't want to be the first in the class. It was just a class and we went. And I remember in the class talking, 2004, talking to Ken Schwaber. And afterwards, I realized he was playing sort of dumb to me. So he asked questions about extreme programming and how that worked with Scrum and so on. I said things like this. They were both for each other. It's beautiful and so on. And Ken was open and oh wow, cool, yeah, and sort of like he pretending, I think pretending to be surprised because he knew all of that. Obviously, he had been working with Ken Beck and he's been working with things like that a lot. So and I still believe that. So over time, XP went down. Scrum sort of became the gorilla method, which is okay. But the fact that XP went down and it wasn't sort of replaced with some sort of other idea or belief that even within Scrum, you need to really think as a team about how are we going to do the work and have a clear agreement over that. So and then I picked out one of the practices of XP that I'm still fond of, and I said let me describe the one development practice from XP that is most overlooked: pair programming. Because I've got some really good experience with that. And I've explained it as following. I said pair programming is the practice of two people co-developing a product backlog item, which is why I prefer calling it pair development, because it's not just the programming part, it should be the development part, a broader perspective. It was very powerful for several teams that I worked with. Within the time that a pair works together, this is my personal experience on how to do pair programming, the individuals take up a different role, which I call driver and navigator. The driver is focused on the code and gets immediate feedback from the navigator who is next to him. The navigator is minding the overview, the design, the overall direction of the development work. The driver and the navigator switch roles frequently and dynamically. It depends on the code or work at hand, whether either of them has already done this before, whether either has a really great idea, etc. Obviously, pair programming necessarily results in a lot of communication, which actually reinforces the need for a dedicated team space. So this is where I reflect again on that shared visual workspace, which is now part of self-organization, but still a must in Scrum because it's about teamwork. You want people to speak up loudly and whatever, not hold back, not use text messages or mails to get in touch with each other within the team. You want them to be able to just speak up sort of on the spot. So obviously pair development, so sort of the elaborate version of pair programming necessarily results in a lot of communication, which actually reinforces the need for a dedicated team space. But the combined intelligence of minimally two people putting their brains together leads to a simpler and higher quality system. Less lines of code, higher quality, easier to maintain, and less complexity in the code, and so on. Yeah. Meanwhile, the unwanted future effort of rework is prevented. Because if you build in quality as from day one, that means later on you will have less rework, less problems popping up, less things happening. Yeah? So waste is prevented. An expression that I used to refer to the sort of um, same ideas from lean. Waste is prevented rather than you have to remove it afterwards. Because the driver and the navigator do not perform the same work, pair development is not more costly than individual development. Ultimately, even lighter applications are created with lighter architectures that are easier to maintain and thus have a lower total cost of ownership. So it's nothing but advantages on doing pair development. Pair development can be extended to even more people and potentially even the whole team working together on the same product backlog item. It leads to WIP, work in process, being limited drastically and potentially even the establishment of a one-piece flow system in which the WIP is limited to one. Not saying that you have to, but it might just happen. Just go from pair programming to people up to the whole team working on it and the whole scala of possibilities in between. It is always better to close a sprint with all started work done, even if the amount of done work is less than anticipated. So don't start any new work if you don't think you will get it done within a sprint. It is mandatory in Scrum to define and devise specific development tactics, the practices to collectively create done output. The rules of Scrum hold no specific instructions because it is a tactical decision. The practices defined in extreme programming can be applied literally in a software development context or show the way in a different context. So in software development, you can do this literally. In another context, other types of work, you can still build on those principles and ideas of extreme programming. So that is a new chapter that I've added to my book. And I've called it extreme development, referring to extreme programming, but it's more than just programming. It's what we call in Scrum development. Like I called it pair development and going up to maybe even working with the whole team. But it's mandatory in Scrum to have agreed standards in place. It's one of the success factors when I think back of when I started with Scrum, and I still think back fondly of those first 3 to 4 years in Scrum, 2003 to 2007. One of the things that stood out for me is the fact that we had clearly agreed development standards, strong development standards that gave us feedback even within the working day. So even faster, more frequent than just the daily Scrum. Another thing that I wanted to highlight or emphasize in my book, it's not in the PowerPoint, so I'm just going to read it if you're okay with that. Is something about product backlog. Because I talk about product backlog, talk about the value of the product backlog, ordering it and so on. I talk about the types of product backlog items. And I've noticed that I was still sort of stuck with this old term of requirements. And I started noticing that the term requirements is often interpreted by other people in another way than I intended to be. So I've elaborated a little bit on that. So let me also, if you're okay with that, read that out to you guys. So I said that hasn't changed. Product backlog is a living artifact. It's a typical expression that we use, right? As development progresses, it is adjusted and updated. That's sort of the meaning of a living artifact. The product owner continuously orders and reorders it. Product backlog being ordered, between quotes, means that there is a clear sequence of items and not just groups of items with the same priority. That was already in the book. I've updated the next paragraph. I said continuously adhering to just enough descriptions and designs of the work and leaving out unnecessary details ensures that no excessive money and time are wasted if the item or an item ultimately is not created. That sort of idea, or is implemented much later, or is implemented in a different fashion. That was already clear. Product backlog shows the next product goal, something I added in the version of 2019 probably, which can be used to group items, features, and non-functional requirements into cohesive feature sets. But then I've added a paragraph, and that is new. So, and I said, regardless of the type of items on your product backlog, beware of, here I go again, trying to think that I'm creative, whatever. Beware of what I called the first time right delusion. The delusion of being able to get it first time right. The belief that perfect product versions can be created in one run without tweaks, without updates, without changes to what was previously built, without changes based upon the feedback of the people that actually use the product. So, a dangerous belief connected to the use of the term requirement is that what is needed is already known prior to its creation and release, without the validation or invalidation of this assumption by actual usage. Because requirement seems to me for people, we know what is required. Well, you can think you know that, but it's an assumption until you go live to the market, and then probably you're going to tweak it, update it, and so on. That means the same sort of product backlog item might pop up or in some sort of way. That's what I wanted to highlight. And I said, after all, there is a reason why the term backlog was chosen. So funny. 11 years after the first publication, I wanted to elaborate a little bit on the why the term backlog, because it's become a very common term, so nobody thinks about the meaning anymore. I wanted to help. So I said, after all, there's a reason why the term backlog was chosen. It holds an implicit suggestion that what is to be created, meaning it's on the backlog, might already be outdated when it's released. As the idea of a backlog, we might already be running behind. So be careful about those things. That is also a little change that I wanted to highlight. So let me take you back to the PowerPoint. So that chapter, new chapter about extreme development that I call it. This is a quote from it. It's what I've been reading. This is my elaborate view on that. My experience based upon starting with extreme programming, the sort of development or what I've called quality loops you need within Scrum. Now I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to go into that in our next online meetup, and that's happening on the 9th of December. So this is first time ever. I wanna do a little bit of advertising. Um, I don't know if you've realized, some of you are in a position, it's really economically, we are really living in harsh times, difficult people getting fired. In my case, I'm self-employed, so I can't get fired unless I would fire myself, but I have no plans to do that. Uh, Not up to now. So I can't get fired, but I have extreme difficulties attracting people to classes and so on. So if you know people that you think might be benefiting from attending a class, I've uh, I've planned some classes in 2025 already. I always plan classes in series, meaning for whatever reason, I'd always do a PSM, then a PSPO, then a PSMA, and a PSPOA. I've got two series planned for 2025, so I would be incredibly grateful if you know people that would have benefit from attending my classes. That I don't know, maybe you might want to refer them to that. I don't know if you've read that in my newsletter. I know if you're part of my newsletter, but in my newsletter, I also highlight the fact that I've got this Scrum Caretaker discount of 10% on all of my professional Scrum classes. I will include it in the PDF of this thing that I will send around. So share that. So all help would be really, really appreciated in my classes because I have to be careful about what sort of consulting assignments do I take or do I not take, given the care that I need to give to our both kids with disabilities. So it's just me asking for a little bit of help. So latest update. I hope you've got some insights into the updates and the changes and why I've made them. It's so fascinating to keep coming up with new insights that you want to share with people. Any questions, remarks, feedback, anything? So, go ahead.
Um, I've been sifting through it as you've been going through your presentation. I will have to read it again. Uh, I popped it in the chat, but I thought, is there going to be another reading like you did for the second edition, which I really
Um,
liked? And then the third edition came out, and I bought the third edition. But are you going to? I know it's 6 hours of work,
Yeah,
but
but I don't mind. I like that in a way. So I'm going to consider Giovanni. I think it's a really great suggestion because I'm thinking about I want to do online meetups again more regularly at least, and just every 1 year and a half. It's not
mm,
enough. That might be a really great topic. Why not? Yeah. Feedback on those previous reading sessions was really great. It's
oh,
really,
brilliant!
yeah.
And also, I work with a lot of neurodiverse people, and I find having the
Cool.
audio for some people is really helpful, and also having them both at the same time, as in reading a book whilst the audio is playing. Some people find
Yeah.
that really helpful.
Yeah. So at least thanks for the confirmation that it's useful and valuable. So
Mm.
I might just do that. Why not? Sort of we're over the top of sales anyhow, so I can't undermine my sales anyhow. It's going down. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Giovanni. Thanks for sharing. So let me quickly. Were there any other questions in the chat? Because as I figured, I wouldn't be able to look at the chat as I was talking. Uh, hmm. No. Reversing Conway's law in a way, yeah, it's true, Giovanni. So thanks for adding that. It's what I've been saying at events recently. I think certainly Guillaume, I know that you've seen me in Belgrade talking about this need to reorganize around Scrum and not just using my belief that Scrum is only used effectively if you do that, but also building indeed on Conway's law. I don't know if anybody knows Conway's law long time ago, 1967, the guy Conway said, you know what? I've been looking at the outcome in terms of systems and services, products, whatever that companies produce, and what is in those products is a reflection of the communication and interaction structures that were used to build the product. So that's an additional driver to think about that. Um,
For want of, I don't want to talk badly about safe. However,
okay.
I think the all the safe frameworks that I implementations that I've seen have not been successful because safe leaves a door open to not reverse Conway's law.
Yeah, that's a
It,
bit of a problem indeed. Yeah, it's sort of like you can change without changing.
yeah,
That's sort
and
of the,
again,
the illusion that it
the
creates.
illusion,
Yeah,
the illusion of agility. I love that video of yours. I
yeah,
watch it every now and then, and there's the 1 hour talk that I go back to. I was like, yeah, that's every safe implementation I've seen.
yeah. Okay, cool. So and Marco or Mark, oh yeah, still here. Okay, you talked about self-organization, self-management. So in Scrum Guide November 2020, they changed self-organization into self-management. Um, I still stick to the idea that self-organization is the overarching principle. And for me, self-management is one instance, one way of implementing self-organization. So that's for me the idea. So in my book, I'm sticking with self-organization, but I've also started realizing that thinking back of a lot of things that I've probably done with also even with Ken and that I see in professional Scrum classes that are rooted in Ken's work a lot. I started realizing it's only recently. It's crazy how over time you sometimes sort of get an insight or a highlight. I start realizing, oh yeah, my God, he's so in I think in professional Scrum we've been focusing a lot on empiricism, inspection, adaptation, and I think self-organization was sort of not really emphasized or highlighted. It has a lot to do with the way Ken looks at things. So I'm going to stick to my idea of Scrum's DNA being self-organization and empiricism. That is what is needed to tackle truly complex problems. Problems that are uncertain, unpredictable, have lots of unforeseen things happening in that. You can only tackle a complex problem by empiricism, but not without self-organization. It can be not be in sort of command and control types of things. And I know they wanted to add clarity about making it self-management, but I think that the danger of calling it only self-management now is that it will upfront limit um, people to only managing themselves within a sprint and not anything that goes beyond that. But it might have to do with, I don't know if that is the case or not, a different meaning that I give to self-organization and self-management. So I'm going to stick to my idea, Scrum's DNA. Um,
Yeah, I can understand that because I've also seen self-organizing as an overarching principle of that. I think I think one of the reasons I heard why they changed it was that there was like the teams were self-organizing, but then they don't self-manage their work,
yeah.
if you see what I mean.
Yeah,
So
and I've seen somewhere, I think on YouTube, a video from Jeff Sutherland on a stage somewhere on an event. I don't know where it was, saying, "Yeah, I got self-organization out of the Scrum Guide is now called self-management." I was like, "Oh, okay." I don't know. I don't know what how to think of that.
it's okay. It's okay. Yes, thank you for your response. Shall I just give you a quick rundown of my other bigger question? You was
Yeah,
talking
go ahead.
about closed feedback loops earlier, about the sprint being a closed feedback loop, and the daily scrum being a small feedback loop, and there could be smaller feedback loops other than the daily
Mhm.
scrum. So I tried to think about actually how applying this. So for one, I'm thinking about the increment. If there are multiple increments being created during the sprint, then maybe there is a closed feedback loop that one can do on that increment instance during the sprint, which
Mhm.
will help lead towards transparency for later in the sprint review when we do the sum of all increments.
Yeah, I agree. So you've got a virtual sort of additional feedback loops if you're able to create a releasable done increment sooner than by the end of sprint. I totally agree. It still has this, and I think it's going to take us a lot of time to get rid of that, that a lot of people still think as a sprint review as a sort of release phase gate, whatever types of
Yeah,
things.
and just
Where
one
you,
increment.
yeah, where the even if you produce multiple increments within a sprint even, then you still have a sprint review. And the purpose of the sprint review for me is still the same, meaning reconnecting with the outside world as a team, reconnecting with stakeholders, key users, and so on, and realigning on future strategies and what to do next and priorities on top of that. But from that traditional IT thinking, people see the review as a sort of release decision type of meeting, where it's going to take us a long time to get that out of people's head that your release frequency, in a way, potentially has nothing to do with your sprint length.
Yeah, I like that, and I kind of like sometimes refer to the sprint review as the loop or the value loop and the planning
Yeah.
loop because it is all about strategy and direction. If I could ask
Yeah.
my second question as well in the same one, which is about closed feedback loops. As a developer and somebody that knows that if we work daily with customers and stakeholders, when you're taking a product backlog item, whether you're one, two, three developers on one item, as you mentioned, WIP one, there is obviously the opportunity to have those small feedback loops as you're creating that value from that product backlog item to ensure that to guarantee that success and satisfaction of what's being created and how it progresses to the sprint goal.
Yeah. Yeah, the way can't really add something to that. It's really, yeah. Yeah. I can tell you in a way confirm sort of at least the spirit of what you're
Yeah.
saying or implying. Yeah.
So both of these feedback loops, when we're talking with customers outside of the sprint review, are more so informal conversations during the sprint that
Yeah.
can be brought to the sprint review for transparency and increasing the customer satisfaction. Does
Yeah.
that sound good with you?
Yeah, absolutely. The sooner that the team connects to maybe not even stakeholder, maybe users, key users, even within a sprint, the higher the quality they will build in before they go live. So that means you shorten the feedback time a lot. Otherwise, you would have to go live and then learn from those users or key users, whatever, whether this is what you want. If you already ask them upfront, then you will build it already as they think they want it. Yeah,
And now
absolutely.
imagine what your sprint review would look like when it
Yeah,
comes to actually, are you doing a gate or are you actually having stakeholders and users and customers
yeah,
championing what you've created to actually have that transparency to focus more on what has changed in the market, what has changed in the environment,
yeah,
what is the next thing that we might be working on going
yeah.
towards the product goal and
And
progress to the product goal.
yeah, and then the sprint review really becomes sort of like the daily scrum, but sort of level plus one. In that sense, rethinking with a group of people, what are we going to do in the next sprint or the next couple of sprints? What will bring the most value? It's like the daily scrum, you do that within the team. What are we going to do next? What is most important to do now? At the same sort of discussion. Yeah, yeah, I fully agree. And if you've been able to reach already within the sprint, for me, the review becomes even more rich because you're not talking about the assumed usage, the assumed value, but you can already look at potentially the actual uses and the actual value that it has already brought or not. Yeah, and it just shortens things a lot. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Even sort of within the time box, it's a bit of a difficult with preparing things that you never know how long is it going to take. So I want to thank you all very much for being here. I've recorded this in general. So I didn't record the informal startup. Um, I don't even know whether I will release also the beautiful questions that you guys had. Uh, it's sort of to punish the people that were not here. Yeah. Not release it. I'll see. I'll think about it. So thank you very much for being here. Have a look at the next meetup, 9 December. I'm going to talk about extreme programming, how I ended up doing extreme program, a little bit of storytelling, what was so powerful about it, and so on. It was inspired by a lady on LinkedIn recently that said, "Oh, Gunther, I'm totally with you in explaining the importance of extreme programming even to Scrum Masters. Scrum Masters should know why this is so great." And then I felt, oh, I've got myself a next topic. It's cool. I can even organize a next meetup. Yep. Okay. Cool. I'm going to stop the recording already.